Teenage brothers vanished hiking in Yellowstone. 6 years of searching and heartbreak, only to end with a chilling discovery wedged between unforgiving rock. The mysterious disappearance that baffled authorities and devastated a family would finally yield answers, but not the ones anyone had hoped for. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. As dusk settled over Yellowstone National Park, the golden light that had bathed Lamar Valley all day gave way to lengthening shadows. Evelyn Rourke checked her watch for the 5th time in 30 minutes. The boys had promised to be back before sunset. Tom Rourke stood at the edge of their campsite, scanning the horizon with growing unease. "They're just lost track of time," he said, but his voice betrayed his concern. "You know how they get when they're exploring." Evelyn nodded, but her eyes never left the trail where Caleb and Mason had disappeared hours earlier. As darkness crept across the valley, concern crystallized into fear. The couple grabbed flashlights and began walking the marked path, their voices echoing through the trees. "Caleb! Mason!" Tom called, his deep voice carrying across the valley. Evelyn's calls soon grew hoarse as they pushed farther along the trail, stopping to listen after each shout. Only the wind answered back. By midnight, park rangers had been notified. By dawn, a full search operation was underway. Ranger Martinez coordinated from a hastily established command post, directing volunteers and staff with maps marked with grid patterns. The morning light revealed the vastness of the wilderness that had swallowed the Rourke brothers. "We've got 3 teams on foot covering the northern ridge," a ranger reported, pointing to sections on the map. "Helicopter support is en route from Bozeman." Evelyn clutched the boys' spare jackets as if the fabric might somehow connect her to her sons. Tom worked alongside the search teams, his face etched with determination and fear. The couple provided every detail they could remember: the boys' clothing, their planned route, Caleb's fascination with hidden viewpoints. By afternoon, the distinctive thrum of helicopter blades cut through the air as the search expanded. Volunteers with tracking dogs combed the underbrush, while rangers with binoculars scanned distant ridgelines. The wilderness seemed to mock their efforts, offering no clues, no trail markers, no discarded gear. "Not even footprints?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely audible. "The ground is too rocky in most areas," explained Dr. Leela Serrano, who had joined the search effort. "And if they ventured off-trail, there are thousands of acres they could have covered." As the first day of searching ended, the command post fell silent. No backpack had been found. No camera with the photos the boys were so eager to take. No evidence of where 2 teenagers might have gone in a landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. Only a bewildering, chilling silence remained, a void that seemed to grow with each passing hour, swallowing hope as completely as the wilderness had swallowed Caleb and Mason Rourke. Days blurred into weeks as the search for Caleb and Mason Rourke intensified. Maps covered every surface at the command post, marked with grids, routes, and the growing territory covered by desperate searchers. Park rangers coordinated teams that combed through hundreds of miles of rugged terrain on foot, their voices growing hoarse from calling the boys' names into the vast wilderness. Evelyn Rourke refused to leave the park, spending sleepless nights by the radio, while Tom joined search parties at dawn. "They're smart boys," she would tell anyone who would listen. "They know to find water, to stay put if they're lost." Her eyes, red-rimmed from crying, still held a mother's unwavering hope. The Yellowstone community rallied around the family. Volunteers arrived from neighboring towns, bringing supplies, search dogs, and determination. Local businesses donated food for the search teams, and a nearby church organized nightly prayer vigils. The collective fear that 2 young lives might be swallowed by the wilderness united strangers in common purpose. Every possible scenario was methodically explored. Rangers investigated potential animal attacks, examining paw prints and recent predator sightings. Swift water rescue teams searched rivers and ravines where the teenagers might have fallen. Wilderness experts analyzed weather patterns from the day of disappearance, calculating how far two boys might travel in varying conditions. "The digital camera is key," insisted the lead ranger during one briefing. "If we find it, we might see where they were headed." The device had become something of a talisman, a modern breadcrumb that might lead them to the brothers. Search teams were instructed to look not just for the boys, but for any sign of the camera, a small black rectangle that might hold crucial clues. Yet, as June turned to July, the absence of evidence became its own terrible evidence. No backpack straps caught on branches, no footprints preserved in mud, no discarded water bottles or food wrappers. The wilderness had claimed the Rourke brothers without leaving a single trace of their passage. After 23 days, the full-scale search was officially scaled back. Evelyn collapsed when told, while Tom stood silent, his face a mask of grief. The family gathered their belongings from the campsite where they had last seen their sons alive. The tent the boys had slept in was folded away, each crease a memory of laughter now silenced. They returned to their home, a house now haunted by absence. Caleb's college applications still on his desk, Mason's basketball uniform still hanging in his closet. The case remained open, but grew cold, like the winter that eventually blanketed the valley, where two brothers had simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but questions that echoed without answers. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The search for Caleb and Mason Rourke gradually transformed from an urgent rescue operation into a somber recovery mission. Maps sprawled across command posts showed hundreds of miles covered by foot, helicopter, and search dogs. The community of Yellowstone and surrounding areas rallied together, driven by a mixture of hope and the haunting fear that two young boys were somewhere out in that vast wilderness. Evelyn and Tom Rourke remained at the park long after most volunteers had returned to their lives. Tom would wake before dawn, studying topographical maps with reddened eyes, convinced there was some corner they hadn't checked. Evelyn kept a vigil at the ranger station, clutching photos of her sons and speaking to anyone who might have seen something. "We explored every possibility," explained one veteran ranger, his voice heavy with the weight of failure. "Animal attack, river accident, disorientation leading to exposure. We investigated it all. The digital camera the brothers had taken was a particular focus. Rangers believed if they could find it, the photos might reveal where the boys had ventured. But like the teenagers themselves, the camera left no trace. As the seasons changed, the case grew cold. The Rourke family eventually returned to their empty home, shattered and without closure. But they never truly left Yellowstone behind. "Some cases mark you forever," Dr. Leila Serrano observed during an interview. The historian had documented similar disappearances throughout the park's history, though none that haunted the staff quite like this one. The wilderness holds its secrets close. The boys' photographs slowly faded on bulletin boards throughout the park, yellowing at the edges as the sun bleached them day after day. Yet their story became firmly embedded in local lore, a cautionary tale told around campfires, a reminder of nature's unforgiving power. Each June, on the anniversary of their disappearance, Evelyn and Tom would return to Lamar Valley. They established a simple tradition, placing 2 stone markers at the edge of the trail where their sons had last been seen. Park regulations prohibited permanent memorials, so the stones would be removed afterward, a temporary remembrance as fleeting as life itself. Among the rangers, theories continued to circulate during quiet moments at the station. Some believed the teenagers had simply wandered too far, becoming disoriented in terrain that could look identical for miles. Others wondered if they had fallen prey to the elements, a sudden storm, a treacherous crossing. A few voiced concerns about something more sinister, though such theories remained whispered rather than documented. The answers remained as elusive as the wilderness itself, vast, silent, and unyielding in its mysteries. Years passed, and the story of Caleb and Mason Rourke gradually transformed into local lore. A cautionary tale whispered around campfires and a painful reminder of wilderness's unforgiving nature. Their smiling faces, once prominently displayed on every bulletin board and ranger station throughout Yellowstone, slowly faded into the background. Yet the memory remained, a wound that never fully healed in the park's collective consciousness. Tom and Evelyn Rourke refused to let their sons be forgotten. Each June, on the anniversary of the disappearance, they would return to Yellowstone, holding a quiet vigil at the edge of Lamar Valley. Park visitors often noticed the couple standing silently, hand in hand, gazing out at the vast landscape that had swallowed their children without a trace. "We come back because this is where they still are," Evelyn once told a sympathetic ranger. "Somewhere out there, they're still 17 and 15, still looking for that perfect view." The mystery haunted the park staff as well. During quiet moments at the ranger station, theories would resurface and be debated anew. Some believed the brothers had simply wandered too far, becoming disoriented in territory that could confuse even experienced hikers. Others suspected they might have fallen victim to a sudden weather change or encountered wildlife at the wrong moment. "Those boys knew the rules," Senior Ranger Martinez would insist during these discussions. "Something unusual happened out there. Something we missed." The search files remained open but inactive, gathering dust in the park's archives. The case had been thoroughly investigated, every trail combed, every ravine examined, every possible scenario explored. Helicopter sweeps, cadaver dogs, thermal imaging, all had yielded nothing. Most painful was the absence of closure. No equipment, no clothing, not even the digital camera the brothers had taken to document their adventure had ever surfaced. It was as if the wilderness had simply erased them, leaving their parents to wonder endlessly about their final moments. Some locals avoided the area where the boys were last seen, claiming it felt heavier somehow, while others left small tokens, stones stacked in remembrance, wildflowers placed on trail markers. The Rourke brothers became part of Yellowstone's darker history. Their disappearance, a reminder that beneath the park's breathtaking beauty lay dangers both seen and unseen. For the rangers who had participated in the original search, the case became a personal ghost. They would sometimes scan the horizon during routine patrols, half expecting to spot something overlooked, some clue that might finally bring peace to the Rourke family and to themselves. The climbers carefully removed the memory card from the digital camera, their hands trembling with anticipation. Despite years of exposure to the elements, the small device had been partially protected by the backpack's water-resistant lining. They connected it to a laptop back at the ranger station, hardly daring to hope. "I can't believe it's actually reading," whispered one of the climbers as thumbnails began populating the screen. The first images showed Caleb and Mason Rourke grinning widely at the camera, their youthful faces full of excitement and adventure. Caleb, the older brother at 17, had his arm slung around 15-year-old Mason's shoulders, both pointing toward distant ridges bathed in golden sunlight. Park Ranger Melissa Collins leaned forward, her breath catching as she scrolled through the timeline of photos. These were taken on the day they disappeared, she confirmed, checking the timestamps against the case file she knew by heart. The images progressed chronologically, showing the brothers venturing further from marked trails, their expressions growing more determined with each shot. The final series of photos revealed something unexpected. The Rourke brothers stood at the edge of a strange rocky alcove, hidden between cliff faces. The natural formation appeared to create a small shelter, invisible from both above and below, explaining why search helicopters had missed it completely. But it was the very last image that sent chills through everyone in the room. Though slightly blurry, as if taken in haste, It clearly showed a roughly carved symbol on a boulder within the alcove. The marking resembled nothing in Yellowstone's documented indigenous artifacts or known trail markers. "What is that?" Ranger Collins murmured, enlarging the image. The symbol appeared deliberate, not natural erosion or random vandalism, but something purposefully etched into stone. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Within hours, the Yellowstone Visitor Center's phone lines were jammed with calls from journalists, true crime enthusiasts, and locals who remembered the search. Social media exploded with theories, and the hashtag Rourke Brothers began trending nationally. For the first time in 6 years, Evelyn and Tom Rourke felt a flicker of hope. The photos confirmed what they had always believed. Their sons hadn't simply wandered off trail and met with an accident. They had been pursuing something specific, something that had called to their curious spirits. They found what they were looking for, Tom said quietly when shown the images. That view no one else had seen. The mysterious symbol became the new focus of the investigation. Was it ancient or recent? A warning or an invitation? And most importantly, did it hold the key to understanding what happened after Caleb pressed the shutter button for the final time? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The journey back to Yellowstone was the hardest trip Evelyn and Tom Rourke had ever made. 6 years of absence had not dulled the pain, but the discovery of the backpack had ignited something they'd nearly lost: hope. The park ranger's office felt smaller than they remembered. The walls lined with the same faded safety posters from when they'd spent countless hours there during the initial search. "We've managed to recover most of the images," explained the lead investigator, sliding the folder across the table. The memory card was remarkably resilient. Evelyn Rourke's hands trembled as she opened it. The first photo showed Caleb's wide grin, his arms slung around Mason's shoulders. Both boys looked windswept and alive, their eyes bright with adventure. She traced her finger over their faces, remembering how Caleb had always been the instigator, Mason the willing accomplice. "This was taken just hours after they left camp," Tom whispered, his voice thick. They flicked through more images: panoramic landscapes, close-ups of unusual rock formations, and selfies of the brothers pointing excitedly at distant ridges. Then came the final photos, shots of a rocky alcove nestled in a remote cliff face. Evelyn gasped, her coffee cup clattering against the table. "That's it. That's the place Caleb drew in his journal for months before our trip." Tom leaned forward, suddenly alert. He was obsessed with it. He'd read about possible ceremonial sites used by indigenous peoples in the area, places that weren't on any tourist map. The ranger looked skeptical. "We've never documented any such site in that section of the park." "That was the point," Tom insisted, a flash of his son's stubbornness crossing his weathered face. Caleb believed modern surveys missed things. He'd spent hours online researching historical accounts, cross-referencing old maps with satellite images. Evelyn nodded, remembering the late nights when she'd find her eldest son hunched over his laptop, scribbling notes. Mason would help him organize everything. They called themselves history detectives. "This fascination with hidden history," Tom continued, his finger tapping on the photo of the rocky alcove, "it wasn't just teenage rebellion. They genuinely believed there were stories waiting to be uncovered, secrets that everyone else had overlooked." The final image in the stack showed a roughly carved symbol on a boulder. It was blurry, taken perhaps in haste or poor light, but unmistakably man-made. Did they find what they were looking for? The ranger asked quietly. Tom's eyes met Evelyn's across the table, sharing the unspoken fear that had haunted them for 6 years. "I think," Evelyn said slowly, "they found something, but I don't think it was what they expected." The team of park historians huddled around a large monitor, examining the blurry image from the recovered camera with intense concentration. Dr. Leela Serrano leaned forward, adjusting her glasses as she studied the strange carving captured in the final photograph taken by the Rourke brothers. At first glance, we all assumed it was indigenous, Dr. Serrano explained, tracing the outline with her finger. The location and crude execution suggested a potential ceremonial site dating back centuries. The historian had spent 20 years documenting Yellowstone's human history, but something about this discovery felt different. After 3 days of analysis and comparison with known Native American symbols, the truth emerged. The carving was neither ancient nor indigenous. Carbon dating of residual tool marks on similar carvings found in the area revealed their modern origins. This symbol dates to the mid-20th century, Dr. Serrano announced to the assembled team of rangers and investigators. It's crude, unfinished, and bears no relation to any indigenous culture that inhabited this region. She pulled up a side-by-side comparison on her tablet. In fact, it resembles nothing in our historical record. The revelation sent ripples through the investigation. What Caleb and Mason had discovered wasn't an archaeological treasure, but something far more disturbing. Evidence of someone's recent presence in one of the park's most remote locations, deliberately hidden from official maps and trails. The boys weren't tracking history, a senior ranger noted grimly. They stumbled onto someone's secret, a clandestine refuge or warning sign that was never meant to be found. Park records were scoured for permits, research projects, or maintenance work that might explain the carving's presence. Nothing matched. The symbol existed in a bureaucratic blind spot, created by someone who knew how to move through Yellowstone's vast wilderness undetected. For Tom and Evelyn Rourke, this development shifted their understanding of what happened to their sons. Tom paced the small conference room, his weathered face tightening with each new detail. Caleb was always drawn to what he called forgotten places, he said, voice breaking slightly. He'd spend hours researching spots that tourists never visit. If he found this symbol, he wouldn't just photograph it and leave. He'd want to understand it. Evelyn nodded, clutching her husband's hand. And Mason would follow wherever his brother led, she added softly. They weren't just lost hikers. They found something or someone they weren't supposed to find. As darkness fell over Yellowstone, the investigation entered uncharted territory. The mystery had transformed from a tragic wilderness accident into something potentially more sinister. A secret deliberately carved into stone, hidden in the cliffs, and possibly connected to the fate of two curious brothers who ventured beyond the boundaries of the known park. "We almost left it there," Alex Reeves confessed, his voice dropping to a near whisper during the televised interview. The climber shifted uncomfortably in his chair as he described the moment he and his climbing partner, Jenna Walsh, spotted the weathered backpack wedged between rock and deadfall. "Something told us to check it out, even though we were pretty exposed on that cliff face." For years, experienced hikers had whispered about the high echoes near those remote cliffs in Yellowstone. Strange repeating sounds that seemed to bounce off the rock walls at dusk. Most rangers dismissed these stories as the wind playing tricks, or perhaps coyotes calling in the distance. The tales became campfire folklore, passed between visitors but never taken seriously by authorities. "I've been guiding in Yellowstone for 15 years, said veteran park guide Martin Holloway, "and those cliffs always gave me an uneasy feeling. Visitors would ask about the echoes. I'd tell them it was just the wind, but honestly, I wasn't so sure myself." The backpack discovery transformed these whispers from superstition to potential evidence. Park rangers now pored over the camera's images with renewed interest, particularly the final shots showing Caleb and Mason Rourke standing near a rocky alcove with the strange carving. The timestamp indicated the photo was taken well after the brothers should have returned to their campsite. Dr. Leela Serrano examined the images with clinical precision. "What's fascinating is that this area isn't on any official park maps," the historian explained, pointing to topographical charts spread across her desk. It's technically within park boundaries, but so remote and difficult to access that it's essentially unmapped territory. The camera itself told a story beyond its images. Though weathered, the device had been deliberately placed inside a waterproof section of the backpack, suggesting whoever left it there wanted it to be preserved. The memory card contained 37 photos in total, chronicling the brothers' journey from marked trails into increasingly remote terrain. "These aren't the actions of boys who were simply lost," Tom Rourke insisted after viewing the recovered images of his sons. His weathered face hardened as he studied the final photos. They were documenting something specific, something they found. The most compelling evidence came from the images themselves. In the background of 3 separate photos, barely noticeable until enhanced by forensic analysts, was a shadowy figure watching from a distance, too blurry for identification, but unmistakably human. The high echoes were no longer just whispers among hikers. Something, or someone, had indeed been present in that remote and precarious place, and the Rourke brothers had unwittingly documented their own observer before vanishing into the wilderness. The backpack's contents were laid out with forensic precision in the Yellowstone Park Ranger Station. Each item, carefully removed with gloved hands, told fragments of a story 6 years in the making. The water bottle, half empty. The crumpled energy bar wrappers, a compass with a cracked face. But it was the folded piece of paper, protected in the inner pocket, that silenced the room. Evelyn and Tom Rourke leaned forward as the lead investigator gently unfolded the damp sheet. The blue-lined paper, torn from a spiral notebook, contained a message in handwriting they immediately recognized as their younger son's. "Not lost, but not supposed to be here," Mason had written, the letters shaky and pressed hard into the paper. "Caleb says we'll go back when the voices stop." Tom placed a steadying hand on Evelyn's shoulder as she covered her mouth. "That's Mason's writing," she whispered. "He always pressed too hard with his pencil." The cryptic message transformed the investigation. What had been presumed a tragic accident now carried darker implications. The brothers hadn't simply wandered off trail and succumbed to the wilderness. Something, or someone, had frightened them. The voices could mean anything, Dr. Leela Serrano suggested carefully. The historian had been called in to provide context. Exhaustion, dehydration, even wind through the cliffs can create auditory hallucinations. But you don't believe that's what this means," Tom interrupted, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "The note suggests they were somewhere they shouldn't have been," one of the rangers offered. "And they were afraid." The investigation team reviewed the photographs from the recovered camera again. The image of the carved symbol took on new significance alongside Mason's words. The crude marking wasn't just an interesting discovery. It was potentially a warning. "We need to consider all possibilities," the lead investigator stated, "including that your sons encountered someone living unofficially within park boundaries." The former seasonal worker's account of seeing the boys arguing with a man in a faded ranger jacket suddenly carried more weight. Park records were pulled, searching for any ranger who might have gone off-grid, any report of unauthorized camps or strange encounters in that remote section. For Evelyn and Tom, the note was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Their sons had been alive, coherent enough to write. They had planned to return. Something had prevented them. "They were coming back," Evelyn repeated, clutching the evidence bag containing her son's words. "They were trying to come home." As darkness fell over Yellowstone that evening, the search teams prepared to return to the cliffs at first light, this time looking not just for 2 lost boys, but for answers to what or who had kept them from finding their way back. Mason's handwritten note sent shockwaves through the investigation team. "Not lost, but not supposed to be here. Caleb says we'll go back when the voices stop." These 15 words, scrawled on a damp piece of lined paper torn from a spiral notebook, transformed the narrative surrounding the Rourke brothers' disappearance from a tragic accident to something far more sinister. Former search volunteer Diane Keller was the first to come forward after news of the note broke. "I remember seeing smoke," she told investigators, her voice wavering with the weight of a 6-year-old memory. "It was just a thin wisp rising above the tree line near those cliffs. We reported it, but everyone assumed it was just a small brush fire from lightning." 3 other volunteers corroborated her account. The smoke had been documented in search logs, but quickly dismissed as a natural occurrence. Yellowstone experiences dozens of lightning strikes each season. What seemed inconsequential in 2014 now carried profound implications. Tom Rourke studied the search maps with trembling hands. "My boys weren't just lost," he whispered, tracing the area where the smoke had been spotted. "Someone was up there. Someone they encountered." Park rangers pulled the original search documentation, finding references to the smoke in 4 separate reports. Each time, it had been noted but deprioritized as teams focused on more promising leads. The brush fire theory had seemed logical then. The summer had been particularly dry, with several lightning-triggered fires already contained elsewhere in the park. "We were looking for lost hikers, not hidden occupants," admitted former search coordinator Jeff Bentley. "The possibility that someone was living up there, potentially interacting with Caleb and Mason, it simply wasn't on our radar." Evelyn Rourke clutched the recovered camera, her knuckles white. "The voices," she repeated, fixating on her younger son's cryptic words. "Mason wrote about voices. What voices? Who was speaking to my boys?" Dr. Leela Serrano suggested that Yellowstone's vast wilderness had long harbored individuals seeking isolation. "The park spans over 2 million acres," she explained. "It's entirely possible for someone to establish a primitive camp and remain undetected for months, even years, especially in the more remote regions." The investigation team began cross-referencing the location of the recovered backpack with the reported smoke sightings. The proximity was undeniable. Less than half a mile separated them. "We need to consider the possibility that Caleb and Mason encountered someone living off-grid," the lead investigator stated during a briefing. "Someone who may have viewed the brothers as a threat to their solitude or their secrets." As night fell over Yellowstone, the question hung in the air like the long-forgotten smoke. Had the search parties been looking in the right places, but for the wrong signs? Had they been mere yards away from the boys, separated only by the silence of those who didn't want to be found? With the discovery of Mason's note, former search volunteers revisited their logs from 6 years earlier. Karen Mitchell, a retired Forest Service employee who had participated in the original search, remembered something that had seemed insignificant at the time. "I reported seeing smoke near the eastern cliffs during the 3rd day," she explained, pointing to her old field notes. The incident commander dismissed it as a lightning strike. There had been a storm the previous night, and small brush fires weren't uncommon. The detail took on new significance in light of the recovered evidence. Park officials gathered at headquarters to review thermal imaging from satellite passes during that period. The technology had improved dramatically since 2014, allowing them to enhance old footage that had previously been deemed inconclusive. "There," said Tom Rourke, his finger trembling as he pointed to a faint heat signature on the monitor. The father had insisted on being present for this phase of the investigation, his weathered face showing both hope and dread. "That's not natural. That's a campfire." The heat signature appeared consistently over 3 nights, tucked against the base of a cliff in an area so remote it had only been superficially searched during the original operation. The location was nearly 2 miles from any established trail, hidden by a dense tree canopy and protected by steep terrain on 3 sides. "Someone was there when my boys disappeared," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. "Someone who didn't want to be found." The park dispatched an elite team of rangers to investigate the site. What they discovered sent ripples through the investigation. A small clearing showed evidence of long-term habitation. Fire-blackened stones formed a ring, surrounded by compacted earth where a tent had once stood. Nearby, partially buried under years of fallen pine needles, they recovered rusted cooking utensils, the remnants of a weathered tarp, and a single bootlace tied in an unusual knot. Dr. Leela Serrano examined photographs from the site, her brow furrowed in concentration. This wasn't a casual camper, she concluded. The layout suggests someone who knew how to remain hidden. They positioned themselves where smoke would dissipate against the cliff face, minimizing visibility from below. The most disturbing aspect wasn't what they found, but what they didn't. No identification, no personal items, nothing to indicate who had maintained this unauthorized presence within Yellowstone's boundaries. Whoever was here knew the park intimately, the lead ranger reported. They existed alongside thousands of visitors and dozens of search parties without detection. The question isn't just whether they encountered Caleb and Mason, it's whether they've ever truly left. Dr. Leela Serrano sat across from the Rourke family in the small conference room of Yellowstone's research center. The historian's office walls were lined with faded photographs of the park's lesser-known history, people who had made the wilderness their home, legally or otherwise. What most visitors don't realize, Dr. Serrano explained, pushing her glasses up, is that Yellowstone has a long history of human hermitage. Since the 1930s, we've documented over 40 individuals who chose to live off-grid within park boundaries. Evelyn Rourke leaned forward, her eyes fixed on a black-and-white photograph of a bearded man standing beside a crude shelter. And these people, they weren't discovered? Eventually they were, the historian replied. Some stayed for weeks, others for years. When rangers found them, many simply packed up and disappeared deeper into the wilderness. A few became hostile, protective of what they'd built. Tom stared at the map spread across the table, tracing the area where the backpack had been found. You think Caleb and Mason stumbled onto someone like this? Dr. Serrano nodded slowly. The evidence points that way. The abandoned campsite rangers discovered near the cliffs shows signs of long-term occupation. Cooking implements buried to hide them from wildlife. A carefully constructed tarp system to collect rainwater. She pulled out photographs of the site. Whoever lived here knew what they were doing. The location is nearly invisible from any trail or aerial view, yet offers clear sightlines of approaching hikers. But why would someone hurt two boys just for finding their camp? Evelyn's voice cracked. Territory, Dr. Serrano said gently. For someone who's rejected society, their sanctuary becomes everything. Mason's note about voices and not being supposed to be there suggests they encountered someone who viewed them as intruders. Tom rubbed his face. So you're saying our sons might have been, what? Held captive by some mountain hermit? It's a theory that fits the evidence, the historian replied. The cassette recording, the timing of the final photograph, the way they seemingly vanished without struggle, they may have encountered someone deeply territorial about their isolation. Dr. Serrano pulled out one final folder. In 2007, a hiker reported being detained for 3 days by an older man who claimed to be protecting the park's secrets. The hiker escaped. But rangers never found the man or his camp. And you think this could be the same person? Evelyn whispered. I can't say for certain, Dr. Serrano admitted. But Yellowstone's vastness has always attracted those seeking to disappear. Your sons may have crossed paths with someone who had perfected that disappearing act, someone who viewed their discovery not as an accident, but as a threat. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Raymond Fletcher, a retired park ranger with 30 years of service, saw the news reports about the recovered camera. The 72-year-old immediately recognized the carving captured in the final photograph taken by the Rourke brothers. That's not some ancient marking, Fletcher explained to investigators, his weathered hands tracing the outline on a printout. That's the old ranger badge design we wore back in the 50s. Not exactly the same, but close enough that someone was trying to copy it. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. What had initially seemed like a possible indigenous artifact was actually something far more recent, and potentially more sinister. Park officials huddled in conference rooms, reviewing the implications of this discovery. If someone had been carving ranger badges into remote rock faces, they were either a former employee marking territory or someone deliberately impersonating authority. Dr. Leela Serrano, who had been consulting on the case since the backpack's discovery, provided crucial historical context. Yellowstone has always had its share of hermits and recluses, she explained, her voice steady as she addressed the team. The park's vastness makes it possible for people to disappear into the wilderness, sometimes for years. The historian shared documented cases spanning decades, individuals who had established hidden camps far from trails, living off the land and avoiding detection. Some were harmless nature lovers seeking solitude, while others were fugitives or troubled souls fleeing society. Most left quietly when discovered, Serrano continued. But there were cases where these individuals became territorial, even aggressive, about protecting their isolation. This perspective cast the brothers' disappearance in a chilling new light. Caleb and Mason, with their adventurous spirits and curiosity about hidden places, might have unwittingly stumbled into someone's self-proclaimed domain, a sanctuary jealously guarded by a person who had rejected civilization. The note found in the backpack suddenly made more sense. Not lost, but not supposed to be here. The boys had realized they'd crossed an invisible boundary. Tom Rourke, when presented with this theory, nodded slowly. Caleb always wanted to find places no one else had seen, he said, his voice breaking. He wouldn't have understood that some secrets don't want to be found. Evelyn clutched her husband's hand, tears streaming down her face. The possibility that their sons had encountered not wild animals or treacherous terrain, but another human being, someone who might have deliberately harmed them, was almost too painful to contemplate. As investigators returned to the cliffs with this new understanding, they searched not just for two lost boys, but for evidence of a hidden world, one policed by someone who had carved symbols of authority and who might have gone to extreme lengths to remain invisible. Sitting in the sunlit corner of her living room, surrounded by framed photos of her sons, Evelyn Rourke breaks her years of silence. The interview, her first since the discovery of the backpack, reveals a mother who has spent 6 years analyzing every conversation, every sign she might have missed. Caleb was different that summer, Evelyn says, her fingers tracing the edge of a photo showing her eldest son standing proudly atop a smaller peak. He had college applications waiting at home. He talked constantly about making his mark, finding something no one else had seen. Her voice softens. It wasn't just teenage rebellion. He had this hunger to prove himself before adulthood claimed him. She describes how Caleb had spent months researching Yellowstone's history, fascinated by stories of hidden caves and unmarked trails. His bedroom walls had been covered with maps, sticky notes marking spots he believed held secrets. Mason worshipped his brother, she continues. Where Caleb went, Mason followed. Not blindly, they argued plenty, but with complete trust. Tom Rourke nods beside his wife, adding that their younger son had always been the peacemaker, the one who balanced Caleb's sometimes reckless enthusiasm with practical considerations. The mother recalls their final family dinner at the campsite, how Caleb had challenged his father's warnings about staying on marked trails. He said something I'll never forget. The best discoveries happen when you stop following other people's footsteps. Her eyes glisten. I was proud of his spirit, even while I worried. What haunts Evelyn most isn't just their physical absence, but understanding how the boys' developmental stage contributed to their fate. Teenagers push boundaries. That's how they grow. But Caleb and Mason pushed into something they weren't prepared for. She believes they encountered someone who took advantage of their youthful curiosity, someone who recognized their vulnerability. Tom reaches for his wife's hand as she explains that their son's disappearance represents more than a wilderness tragedy. It's about that dangerous intersection between childhood and adulthood, when you're brave enough to challenge the world, but not experienced enough to recognize all its dangers. The parents have preserved their son's bedroom exactly as they left it. College brochures still spread across Caleb's desk, Mason's guitar leaning against his bed. They were becoming men, Evelyn whispers, but they were still boys who thought adventure couldn't hurt them. As the interview concludes, she shares her most painful realization. We taught them to be curious, to seek answers. We never imagined that same curiosity would lead them somewhere they couldn't return from. The winter of 2020 brought an unexpected break in the case that had haunted Yellowstone for over 6 years. A woman named Rachel Donovan, who had worked as a seasonal gift shop employee during the summer of 2014, was scrolling through social media when she came across the news about the recovered backpack. The images of Caleb and Mason Rourke staring back at her from her screen made her hands tremble so violently she dropped her phone. "I saw them," Rachel told investigators in her recorded statement. "I've carried this for years, but nobody believed me back then." She described how on an evening hike after her shift, she had ventured slightly off trail and spotted 2 teenage boys who matched the Rourke's description. The brothers weren't alone. According to Rachel, they were engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with an older man wearing a faded ranger jacket that seemed too worn to be official uniform. The older boy was standing protectively in front of his brother, she recalled. Their body language was defensive, scared even. When Rachel reported this sighting during the initial search, her account was dismissed. Search coordinators had focused their efforts elsewhere, believing the brothers had wandered deeper into the wilderness. Her testimony was filed away as one of dozens of unverified sightings that poured in during those chaotic days. Evelyn Rourke wept openly when presented with this new information. "I always knew my boys wouldn't just vanish," she said, clutching Tom's hand. Caleb was restless that summer. Yes, he was 17, standing at the threshold of adulthood, desperate to prove himself before college. Her husband nodded in agreement, adding that their older son had always been drawn to mysteries and hidden places. Mason followed wherever his brother led, Tom explained. Not because he couldn't think for himself, but because their bond was unbreakable. If Caleb wanted to explore beyond the boundaries, Mason would be right there beside him. Dr. Leela Serrano, analyzing the new testimony, noted that the timing aligned perfectly with the metadata from the recovered camera. This wasn't simply 2 boys lost in the wilderness, the historian stated. This suggests an encounter, possibly confrontational, with someone who shouldn't have been there either. For the Rourke parents, Rachel's testimony confirmed what they had suspected for years. Their son's disappearance wasn't merely about challenging nature's boundaries. It stemmed from that uniquely teenage tension, the pull between safety and freedom, between heeding warnings and testing limits. Caleb and Mason weren't just hiking that day, Evelyn said softly. They were crossing the invisible line between childhood and independence. Someone took advantage of that moment, that vulnerability. With this revelation, the search for the truth behind what happened to the Rourke brothers entered a new and disturbing chapter. In late 2020, an unexpected witness emerged from the shadows of the past. Meredith Dawson, a former seasonal worker at Yellowstone, had been silently carrying a burden for 6 years. After seeing news coverage about the recovered backpack, she finally found the courage to come forward with what she had seen. "I was afraid nobody would believe me," Meredith explained to investigators, her hands trembling as she recounted her story. She described how, on that summer day in 2014, she had been collecting trash along a lesser-used trail when she spotted 2 teenage boys who matched Caleb and Mason's descriptions. The brothers weren't alone. They were talking to this older man, she recalled. He wore a faded ranger jacket, not current issue, something older. The conversation looked tense. Meredith described how the younger boy, presumably Mason, kept looking back toward the main trail, while the older boy seemed to be arguing with the man. At the time, she assumed it was a park ranger scolding hikers for venturing off-trail. When the Rourke brothers' disappearance made headlines days later, Meredith had attempted to report what she'd seen. Her supervisor dismissed her account, suggesting she'd confused the timeline or seen different hikers altogether. Young and intimidated, she let the matter drop. "I've regretted my silence every day since," she admitted. The Park Service immediately launched a review of her testimony. What had seemed insignificant 6 years ago now cast the entire case in a sinister light. The location she described aligned perfectly with the area where the backpack was eventually discovered. Tom Rourke, upon hearing the news, broke down. "Someone saw my boys," he whispered. "Someone saw them alive, and nobody listened." Evelyn clutched her husband's hand as they sat through briefings with investigators. The mother's quiet resilience had never wavered through the years. But this revelation kindled something new in her eyes, a fierce determination that bordered on rage. The case file, gathering dust for years under wilderness accident presumed fatal, was officially reclassified. Park officials held a somber press conference where, for the first time, they publicly acknowledged what the Rourke family had feared from the beginning. Foul play could not be ruled out. Digital forensics experts, armed with advanced recovery techniques unavailable in 2014, made another breakthrough when examining the camera's metadata. The timestamp on the final photograph, the one showing the carved symbol, was dated 2 days after search parties had already been combing the valley for the missing brothers. "This changes everything," Dr. Serrano explained to the investigation team. "It means they were alive, taking photographs well after we thought they'd vanished. The question now isn't just where they went, but who might have been keeping them there." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. With the new testimony from the former seasonal worker, the National Park Service made a pivotal decision in December of 2020. After 6 years of classifying the Rourke brothers' case as a presumed wilderness accident, officials formally reclassified it as an unresolved disappearance with suspicious circumstances. For the first time since Caleb and Mason vanished, rangers publicly acknowledged what many had feared but few dared suggest. Foul play could not be ruled out. "We have a responsibility to follow the evidence wherever it leads," said the head ranger at a somber press conference that drew national attention. Evelyn and Tom Rourke stood silently behind him, their faces showing both relief at the validation and renewed grief at what this might mean for their sons. Forensic technicians examining the recovered digital camera made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The metadata from the final photograph, the blurry image of the carved symbol, was time-stamped 2 days after search parties believed the boys had disappeared. This chilling detail suggested that Caleb and Mason had been alive longer than anyone realized, possibly held somewhere against their will while hundreds searched nearby. "Those 48 hours change everything about this case," Dr. Leila Serrano explained to investigators. The historian had been consulting on the historical context of the symbol, but now found herself drawn deeper into the mystery's darker implications. If they were still taking pictures 2 days later, someone must have been controlling their movements. The cassette recording, with its haunting command, "You'll stay until it's safe," now seemed less like the ravings of a hermit and more like evidence of deliberate confinement. Investigators began mapping potential hiding places within a day's hike of where the backpack was found, focusing on caves and abandoned structures that could shelter multiple people. Tom Rourke, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout the years of uncertainty, broke down during a private meeting with investigators. "My boys weren't just lost," he said, his voice cracking. "Someone took them. Someone kept them from coming home." The Park Service assembled a specialized cold case team, including former FBI agents with experience in wilderness disappearances. They re-interviewed every person involved in the original search, looking for overlooked details that might point to the identity of the man in the faded ranger jacket. Meanwhile, the retired ranger whose name patch was later discovered became the focus of intense scrutiny. Records showed he had received several warnings about unauthorized overnight stays in the park before his sudden departure decades earlier. His current whereabouts remained unknown, adding another layer to the expanding mystery that had begun with two adventurous brothers stepping off a marked trail in search of an undiscovered view. Leela Serrano hunched over dusty personnel files in the park's administrative archives, her fingers tracing the faded photograph of a man who had vanished almost as completely as the Rourke brothers. The retired ranger, Gerald Mackenzie, according to his file, had worked at Yellowstone for 27 years before abruptly retiring in 1989. He was reported living in the park at least 4 times, Lila murmured to Tom Rourke, who stood beside her with arms crossed, always during winter months when visitor numbers dropped. The historian pointed to disciplinary notes in the file. Colleagues had reported seeing smoke from unauthorized campsites. Hikers occasionally mentioned encounters with a man who acted like he owned the place. Yet each investigation ended the same way: insufficient evidence, no formal charges. What happened after he retired? Tom asked, his voice heavy with the weight of 6 years searching for his sons. That's just it, Lila replied. Nothing. No tax records, no property ownership, no death certificate. It's as if Gerald simply walked into the wilderness and disappeared. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, forensic technicians worked meticulously to recover data from the water-damaged cassette tape found near the second backpack. The laboratory hummed with tension as specialists applied heat treatments and delicate cleaning procedures to salvage whatever might remain on the magnetic strip. "We've got something," announced the lead technician after hours of painstaking work. The room fell silent as she pressed play on the restored audio. First came the unmistakable sound of rushing water, then teenage laughter. "Check this out." It was Caleb's voice, clear despite the tape's deterioration. Mason's higher-pitched response followed. "No way that's on any map." More rustling sounds, footsteps on rocky ground. Then, abruptly, a third voice, deeper, authoritative, with an edge that sent chills through everyone listening. "You boys shouldn't be here." A pause. "You'll stay until it's safe." The tape continued for another 30 seconds, just breathing and what sounded like distant thunder before cutting off. Evelyn Rourke, who had insisted on being present for the tape's analysis, gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. "They were alive," she whispered. "Days after everyone stopped looking, my boys were alive." The park superintendent, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. "We're reopening everything. Every trail, every shelter, every unauthorized structure in that sector." He looked directly at Evelyn and Tom. "We're going to find out what happened to your sons and who that man on the tape is." The cassette became the most compelling evidence yet that the Rourke brothers hadn't simply been lost to the wilderness. They had encountered someone who didn't want them to leave. The discovery of the cassette tape sent shockwaves through the Yellowstone community. Dr. Leela Serrano spent weeks meticulously researching the retired ranger's history, digging through dusty personnel files and interviewing former colleagues. The man had worked at the park for nearly 3 decades before his abrupt departure in 1989, leaving behind whispered rumors but little concrete evidence. He was always different, a former coworker told investigators. Loved the park more than people. Said civilization was poisoning the wilderness. The audio restoration lab confirmed what the Rourke family had feared. The voices on the damaged tape belonged to Caleb and Mason. Their laughter, captured in time, gave way to a man's stern warning. "You'll stay until it's safe." The timestamp suggested the recording was made 4 days after their disappearance, when search efforts were already winding down. Tom Rourke listened to the tape only once. "That's them," he said, his voice breaking. "That's my boys." Evelyn couldn't bring herself to hear it at all. Park officials found themselves caught in a storm of public opinion. Local business owners worried about tourism impact, while advocacy groups demanded full transparency. The superintendent faced pointed questions at town halls. How could someone live undetected in the park for years? Were there others? What systems had failed these teenagers? "We're dealing with 1,200 square miles of wilderness," a senior ranger explained during a tense press conference. "It's impossible to monitor every ridge and valley." Meanwhile, Dr. Serrano uncovered troubling details about the retired ranger's past. He had been reprimanded twice for unauthorized overnight stays in remote sectors during off-seasons. His personnel file contained notes about excessive territorial behavior regarding certain park areas, including sections near the cliffs where the backpack was found. "He created his own jurisdiction," Dr. Serrano explained, "a kingdom within the park where he enforced his own rules." Most disturbing was the cassette's final seconds, barely audible under layers of degradation. Audio technicians enhanced it to reveal Mason's voice, unnaturally calm. "He says we're learning something important, that we'll understand when we're ready." The ranger's current whereabouts remain unknown. His Social Security benefits stopped being collected 5 years ago, but no death certificate exists. Some speculate he still lives somewhere in the vast Yellowstone wilderness, perhaps watching as investigators piece together his story. Every June, the Rourke family returns to Lamar Valley, placing small stone markers in a growing line that points toward the distant cliffs. A ritual of remembrance and a silent plea for answers that may never come.